All right, we're continuing assignment 2. So ways to kind of know always what we're doing in class. Right on the home page is that course outline. You can view it online, or you can view the printout I gave you, or you can print out your own copy. In the electronic file, you'll see that the class time's in red, the linked readings are in blue, and the only required linked reading is right here, chapter 2. And it's also going to be linked in Unit 5 that we're working on and trying to finish up today for question of the day 2. So we scroll to today's date, and we see that we're turning in assignment 2 today. We're going to try to do a presentation critique for it in class. And question of the day 2 needs to be answered with over 100 words so that we can discuss it next week. That's part of the Unit 5. And then we're going to get introduced to our first proving ground. So our next assignment is worth 1.5 points instead of the 3 points for a regular assignment. Proving grounds are not exercises, they're not assignments, they're not questions of the day. They actually help us earn our creative problem solving badge. There are 4 required proving grounds to earn the creative problem solving badge. And the first one is going to be shown by placing our composite creature into our fantasy landscape and recognizing the resolution and the potential in the real world, printing for that resolution, and writing a little statement connecting how that character can live in that environment. Right? So all of those things are necessary. So we'll get into that. I'll introduce at the end of this class. We'll get into that next class when that is due. So we just keep moving along. So if you miss class, you miss content, the course outline will always tell you what we're doing. Now in terms of seeing what we're doing, we can go to the assignments to kind of shortcut. And for assignment 2, in the shortcut to where we turn the assignment in, I also, on this assignments page, give you like extra supplemental things that might be interesting to you. So for assignment 1, we looked at some of the professional artists that use compositing in their commercial work and their fine art work. Here is a really interesting example taken from a student's final presentation with permission. But this is how creature compositing and concept work can turn from a hobby into a profession. So this is the work of R.J. Palmer, who started as a college student taking digital art classes, just like you. And they had a real interest in dinosaurs. I've had more than a few students that have an interest in dinosaurs, right? But using computer compositing and using found pixels, other people's pixels from the Natural History Museum of New York through anatomical sites showing like the muscles of horses and lizards and other animals. What he did was to really take that whole skeletal template thing seriously and to first composite skeletal models and then to composite each muscle group on its own layer. So when you layer up his kind of student work, he would take the skeletons, layer up the muscles to connect, and then put a skin over all of it. And this is using photo reference and then using the computer to kind of make them match the angle and the lighting. And this was before, in newer versions, he's added feathers to all of these. So this is older thinking in the 90s. Okay, so he did that for a while. And then he put them into environments, as realistically as he could. And this was kind of early in social media, so he started posting these things, always with a human figure for scale. And then, with the popularity of series like Game of Thrones, wanting to use that same approach for fantasy creatures, for creatures that don't have photographic reference, but you can use the existing photographic reference, as we are, and manipulate it to fit the aims of the idea. So in this case, his design for a medieval dragon, again, with the forearms and the wings both being there, that's impossible structure within our reality. But he finds a way to wrap the wing muscles around the breastbone and to tuck the arm muscles underneath the breastbone. So again, thinking through all the anatomy so it's believable. One tip that is incredibly helpful for creature designers is making maquettes. Now, a very simple maquette can just be made with pipe cleaners like this. More complex maquettes You use the wireframe, and then you put plasticine clay, like Sculpey, over the top of it, and then you can carve it. But it helps you pose things, see them at different angles, so that you can understand that anatomy even better. We were just doing it with sketching, with our skeletal templates last class. Now, that same thinking works for two-dimensional designs as well. So he does the photorealistic composites, but he's also able to use that same thinking to much faster create kind of believable concepts for animation, for 2D, for flat graphics. And his dream was to work in animation, work in video game concept art, that kind of thing, as a creature designer. So then, this is when he started to get noticed online. He wanted to start taking Pokemon designs, which are flat illustrations outlined, right? And try to treat them like he treated the dragons or the more photorealistic materials. And he tested this out by doing things that were already in live action, like H.R. Geiger's Aliens, which are based on cockroaches and kind of spinal vertebrae, making his own composites of that. But eventually he took the flat Pokemon and he turned them into these kind of realistic versions, right? Using composited textures and his understanding of anatomy. And he kept doing that. He kept posting them, and he started getting more and more notice for them. And sometimes they're good, sometimes they're a little weak. This one's my favorite. He added a little flare animation to it. And he started to post also, because the online community in digital art's very generous, he started to post his tips and his process videos, and you can look him up. But his number one piece of advice is to organize your files, right? So when we were talking about differences between traditional and digital art, one of those big disadvantages of digital art is it's so easy to lose. You have to stay organized, right? So with that in mind, I organized all the desktops. You'll find your master folders under the documents. That's where it needs to go at the end. We want to try to keep those desktops clean at the end of class, but use them heavily during class. And you'll see, just like we're doing for our creatures, he has like folders and then reference folders and various versions of finishes. Now, all of that online work actually landed him his first professional job, which was as a character designer for the first live-action Pokemon movie, right, which was Detective Pikachu. So the reason, and that got a lot of critical praise for how closely those 3D designs matched the cartoons, right, which is a very difficult thing to do. And thus, since he got critical acclaim for that work, he's been gainfully employed ever since, right? So that's where this kind of understanding the exact skills for this project can be used in a professional way. So let's go to where we were and kind of review where we are now and how we got there. So the first thing you want to make sure you post by tonight's deadline is your planning sketch. Right? And then once you have your planning sketch, which could be inspired by anything you want, this was mine, you found references on Pixabay. That's because they'll have no watermarks. They're really high quality. And we want, at the end of the day, at least 5. So if I look at my assignment 2 folder, I look at my references, I've got quite a few, but I might still be missing some. Like I'm thinking about the back of the body. I don't really have much yet. Maybe this one. Yeah, I could probably use that. All right, so then what we did, let's open up the actual project. I'm going to take my PSD that we're working on for assignment 2, put it on the desktop, and work on it from there. Once you're signed into Photoshop, to know you're signed in, you can click on Help, and you'll see your email there. All right, now I put the head all into one group. So now this can be kind of moved together and moved closer to the center Now I want to bring in some of my other references. So the claws, the arms, I really liked this one. So I'm going to drag and drop that in. And then to rough cut and place it, because I definitely want this to feel more like a crab than a spider, right? I am going to use my lasso and rough cut with a lot of overlap around this claw. This often happens with reference. Notice that the back of the claw is really, really out of focus, but this part really is clear and in focus. So then how do I cut it out? I hit Command J, and then I turn off the Smart Object. And then I can start transforming it. It's bigger than I need. And fitting it onto my creature. And I think I'm going to actually reverse the positioning of them. So the smaller claw is on the outside. Because I can blend it, hopefully a little bit this way, with what's behind. And don't forget that you can always right-click within your transform box and you can do things like warp or distort to play with the angles and the proportions. Okay, next, I'm going to use my direct adjustments, levels, midtone slider, darker or brighter, definitely darker in this case. Actually, I'm also going to limit the highlights on levels, which you do with these limit sliders at the bottom. So its highlights aren't quite so bright white. Next, color balance. So we want to memorize these, right? The order of these, the temperature of the color. Because though I still want that yellow kind of orangish color, I want it to feel like it's lit by the same temperature lighting that's lighting the rest of my creature. The eyes, the mandibles, the head, this kind of nightmare I'm creating. And I can do it first in the midtones, then in the highlights, add a little bit of that weird green in there, and then put some blues in the shadows. And notice I am not moving these sliders very far, because the further you move them, the more you kind of generalize pixels into groups together. You lose their differentiation, something like that. Yeah, to differentiate between pixels, yes. Because you want them all to have their unique properties. Okay, now since I've done that, I get to trim this out. But remember, I just did the first two direct adjustments. Sometimes you need the third, which is hue saturation. So you always need levels, you always need color balance. Every once in a while, you need hue saturation, just for the spectrum and the intensity. So I'm going to take the intensity a little bit down. All right, now I go to the selection process. This is something we've gotten a lot of practice with. It's kind of the key to compositing. I can just use a 1 pixel feather. I had a student that put in 100 pixel feather, and they were wondering why their lasso gave them always just a really soft blur. So 1 pixel feather is generally helpful. This is why. Because feathering just 1 pixel will still make things fairly sharp, but if you want to soften them, you can just hit delete multiple times. And because this is a hard shell, instead of using the magic wand to try to get all that background, I am just using that feather. I'll zoom in so you can see what the feather does. Instead of cutting right in between those square pixels, I'm going to add to it with my Shift key. Remember, you can augment selections. So get a little bit of these bumps in there.